The glass conference room felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in as Franklin Hodge leaned back in his leather chair. His expression was practiced sympathy, the kind executives perfect for delivering bad news they don't actually feel bad about. "Dorothy, I've reviewed your raise request carefully." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Unfortunately, it's not possible this year. Budget constraints, you understand." My chest tightened, but I kept my face neutral. 2 years of 60-hour weeks, of building client relationships from scratch, of turning a struggling division into a profit center. 2 years of being told a next quarter and a we'll see. The vac hummed overhead, filling the uncomfortable silence. Then Franklin's gaze slid sideways to the young man sitting beside him, and his tone shifted, warming considerably. "However, we are fast-tracking Miles here. Fresh perspective, new energy. He'll be taking on expanded responsibilities with appropriate compensation." Miles. Franklin's nephew. The kid who'd been hired 3 months ago and still couldn't remember our major clients' names. He'd now be earning more than me for doing a job I'd been quietly mastering for 2 years. The unfairness landed like a physical blow. My hands clenched under the table, nails digging into my palms. But I forced my expression to remain pleasant, professional. Getting angry would give Franklin exactly what he expected, proof that I was emotional, unreasonable, difficult. Women who pushed back in moments like these were always labeled difficult. So instead, I smiled. "I understand completely." The words tasted like ash. Budget constraints are challenging for everyone. Franklin's shoulders relaxed slightly. He'd been prepared for resistance, maybe even tears. My calm acceptance threw him off balance, though he recovered quickly. "I knew you'd be a team player about this, Dorothy. That's why we value you so much." The corporate speak was suffocating. Miles shifted uncomfortably beside his uncle, at least having the decency to look embarrassed. "Congratulations, Miles," I said, extending my hand across the table. "I'm sure you'll do great things." He shook it weakly, mumbling thanks. Franklin beamed, proud of his nephew and relieved I wasn't making a scene. What he didn't realize was that my calm wasn't acceptance. It was calculation. Something inside me had gone cold and sharp. The hallway back to my desk felt endless. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh white. Coworkers glanced up as I passed, then quickly looked away. Office gossip traveled fast. They already knew Franklin had denied my raise. They probably knew about Miles too. Nobody met my eyes. Nobody asked if I was okay. The silence told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about one unfair decision. This was about a culture where nepotism thrived, where hard work meant nothing compared to family connections. Other people had probably experienced similar treatment and said nothing, just swallowed it and kept working. I reached my cubicle, a small workspace tucked in the back corner of the operations floor. No window, no door, just fabric walls and a desk covered in sticky notes and client files. For 2 years, this had been enough. I told myself the work mattered more than the recognition. That eventually, someone would notice my contributions. Now I understood nobody was coming to save me. If I wanted things to change, I'd have to force that change myself. My name is Dorothy Whitman, and until that moment in Franklin's office, I'd been invisible. Not literally, of course. People saw me, spoke to me, relied on me constantly. But they didn't really see what I did, how much I held together, how many problems I solved before anyone else noticed they existed. My official title was Operations Coordinator, a vague designation that meant whatever management needed it to mean. In reality, I managed the entire client services pipeline for our division. I tracked deliverables, anticipated bottlenecks, maintained relationships with 17 major accounts. I knew every client's preferences, their billing cycles, their contact hierarchies. When projects went smoothly, Franklin took credit. When problems arose, I fixed them quietly before they escalated. The systems I built ran so seamlessly that executives assumed they'd always existed. Nobody questioned how information flowed or why deadlines were always met. They just expected it, like expecting the lights to work when you flipped a switch. And because everything worked, because I never demanded attention or credit, I became part of the infrastructure. Necessary but unnoticed. Until now. The next morning, Miles appeared at my cubicle with a nervous smile and a notebook. "Hey, Dorothy. Uncle Franklin said you could help me get oriented with the Carlson account." Uncle Franklin. He didn't even pretend the nepotism wasn't blatant. I glanced up from my computer, keeping my expression neutral. "What specifically do you need to know?" He flipped through his notebook, which appeared mostly empty. "Just, like, the basics. Who's the main contact, what they expect, that kind of thing." The Carlson account represented 30% of our division's revenue. It was our largest client, notoriously demanding, with a complex approval process I'd spent months learning. And Miles wanted the basics. Carlson Industries has 3 decision-makers. I began, pulling up my files. Patrick Carlson handles budget approval, his daughter Hannah manages operations, and their CFO Vincent oversees compliance. Each has different priorities and communication preferences. Miles scribbled frantically. "How do you remember all that?" "Experience," I replied simply. Franklin hovered nearby, watching us with satisfaction. His nephew was learning from the best, absorbing knowledge I'd earned through trial and error. This was going to get messy. The call came 2 days later. Hannah Carlson's voice was tight with barely controlled frustration. "Dorothy, we received numbers from your team that don't match our last conversation. The timeline's completely wrong." My stomach dropped. "What numbers did you receive?" She rattled off figures I'd never seen before, projections that made no sense given Carlson's current capacity. "Those aren't from me," I said carefully. "Who sent them?" "A pause. Someone named Miles. He said he was taking over account management." Of course he did. Miles had jumped ahead without understanding the context, sending preliminary numbers from an outdated template. To Carlson Industries, it looked like we didn't know our own client. "Hannah, I apologize for the confusion. Those figures were preliminary and shouldn't have been sent without review. Let me pull the correct projections and have them to you within the hour." Her sigh of relief was audible. "Thank you." I was starting to worry. I spent the next hour rebuilding the analysis Miles had mangled, double-checking every calculation. Then I sent it directly to Hannah with a note explaining the miscommunication. I didn't copy Miles or Franklin. Just fixed it quietly, like always. That evening, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open and a cup of tea cooling beside me. The unit was small, barely affordable on my current salary, but it was mine. Private. Safe. I opened a folder I'd created months ago, back when Franklin first started making promises about my raise that never materialized. The folder was labeled simply, "A Records." Inside were copies of emails showing my work on major projects. Screenshots of client communications praising my service. Documentation of processes I'd created. timelines proving I'd been doing Miles's new job long before he arrived. I'd started collecting this information out of general caution, a habit developed from years of watching people take credit for others' work. Now it felt prophetic. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was emotional, messy, unpredictable. This was about leverage, documentation, proof. If Franklin wanted to sideline me in favor of his nephew, fine. But I'd make sure everyone understood exactly what they were losing. I opened a new document and began writing. Not a resignation letter. A strategic plan. The quarterly review meeting brought together all division heads and key executives. Franklin stood at the front of the conference room, laser pointer in hand, walking through a presentation about our division's success. Revenue was up 18%. Client retention had reached 94%. New account acquisition exceeded targets. He clicked to the next slide, showing the client service workflow. Our streamlined operations have been crucial to this growth, Franklin said confidently. By implementing systematic tracking and proactive communication, we've eliminated most delivery issues before they impact clients. Every word described work I'd done. Systems I'd built. Processes I documented and trained others to follow. Franklin presented it all as his strategic vision, his management excellence. The executives nodded approvingly, taking notes. Nobody asked who actually did the implementation. Nobody questioned the details. I sat in the back corner, watching Franklin bask in credit for my invisible labor. My expression remained neutral, professional. But inside, something crystallized. Silence could be a weapon. And I was learning exactly when to use it. The crack appeared during a routine meeting with Hampton Technologies, a mid-sized account considering expansion. Franklin led the presentation, confident and smooth. He covered our service capabilities, pricing structures, growth potential. Then the Hampton CFO asked a technical question about integration timelines. If we expand to 3 additional locations, what's the realistic deployment schedule considering your current client load? Franklin hesitated barely a second before responding. We can accommodate that within standard timeframes. Our capacity is designed for scalability. The CFO frowned. Can you quantify standard timeframes? Franklin's confidence wavered. Dorothy handles those specifics. Dorothy? All eyes turned to me. I'd been quiet throughout the meeting, taking notes in the corner. Now they needed the information only I possessed. Current deployment averages 6 to 8 weeks per location, I said evenly, depending on infrastructure complexity. For Hampton setup, considering existing workload, I'd estimate 7 weeks per location. Sequential deployment across 3 locations would take approximately 5 months total. The CFO nodded, satisfied. Franklin's jaw tightened slightly. The executives had noticed the knowledge gap. They were starting to see where the real expertise lived. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon, copied to Franklin but addressed primarily to me. Dorothy, would like you looped into the Westfield contract negotiations. Your insights on operational feasibility would be valuable. Can you join Tuesday's planning session? The sender was Timothy Brennan, Senior Vice President. The Westfield deal represented potential revenue of $2 million annually, our largest prospect in 3 years. And Timothy wanted me specifically involved. I replied professionally, confirming my attendance. Then I watched Franklin's reaction from across the operations floor. He read the email at his desk, his expression hardening. This was the second time this week that leadership had reached out to me directly, bypassing him. The power dynamic was shifting, subtly but unmistakably. Franklin stood abruptly and walked to my cubicle. About the Westfield meeting, he said quietly. I'll brief you beforehand on key talking points. Important we present unified messaging. Translation. He wanted to control what I said, make sure I didn't outshine him. Of course, I replied mildly. I'll prepare operational analysis for review. His shoulders relaxed slightly. He still thought he could manage this, keep me in my supporting role. What he didn't understand was that I'd already been contacted by 3 different executives this month, all asking questions he couldn't answer. Miles appeared at my desk just before lunch, looking overwhelmed. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His usually neat hair stuck up in odd directions. Dorothy, can we talk? Privately? We moved to an empty conference room. He collapsed into a chair, running his hands through his hair. I'm drowning, he admitted. The accounts, the timelines, the client expectations. I don't know how you managed all this. Part of me felt sympathy. Miles hadn't asked to be fast-tracked beyond his abilities. Franklin had pushed him into a role he wasn't ready for, sacrificing both his nephew's development and client relationships for family favoritism. But sympathy didn't mean I'd rescue him. What specific issues are you facing? I asked neutrally. He listed them: missed deadlines, confused clients, conflicting priorities. All problems that would have been manageable with proper training and realistic expectations. I can help you develop better tracking systems, I said carefully. But Miles, I'm still in my coordinator role. I can't do your job for you. His expression fell. He'd been hoping I'd just take over, fix everything quietly like before. I understand, he said quietly. Uncle Franklin keeps saying I'll figure it out, but... He trailed off, the pressure obvious. Franklin was setting up his own nephew to fail. The shift became impossible to ignore. Emails that used to go through Franklin now came directly to me. Executives who'd barely known my name 6 months ago greeted me in hallways. Timothy Brennan stopped by my cubicle personally to discuss the Westfield proposal. Your operational assessment was exactly what we needed, he said. Clear, detailed, realistic. Franklin's overview was fine, but you provided the substance. I noticed he didn't copy Franklin on his follow-up email. Neither did Karen Westwood, the CFO who'd started requesting my input on budget projections. Or Patrick from Carlson Industries, who now called my direct line instead of going through main channels. Franklin was being slowly, systematically cut out of communications he used to control. And it wasn't my doing. I hadn't campaigned or complained. I'd simply continued doing my work with the same competence I'd always shown. But now, without Miles successfully handling the role Franklin had promoted him into, the gaps in Franklin's knowledge became glaringly obvious. Leadership was connecting directly to the person who actually knew how things worked. Power was moving, flowing around Franklin like water around a stone. Franklin's pushback came during a department meeting. We were reviewing quarterly objectives when he interrupted my status update. Dorothy, I'm concerned about your tone lately. You seem less collaborative, more territorial about processes. The room went quiet. Other coordinators glanced at each other uncomfortably. I kept my expression neutral. Can you provide specific examples? He waved vaguely. Just an overall impression. It's important we all function as team players, not individual contributors. The accusation was transparent. I'd been a team player for 2 years, covering for others, supporting Franklin's presentations, training new hires. Now that executives recognized my contributions directly, He wanted to paint me as difficult. I'm happy to discuss any specific concerns privately, I replied calmly. My goal has always been supporting team success. Franklin's jaw tightened. He'd expected me to get defensive, maybe emotional. My calm professionalism left him nowhere to go. Just something to be mindful of, he muttered, moving on. But the message was clear. He felt threatened and was trying to preemptively undermine me. The problem was, I'd been a team player too long. And everyone else in the room knew it. The LinkedIn message appeared late Thursday afternoon. Hello Dorothy, I'm a recruiter working with several firms seeking operations talent. Your profile suggests strong experience in client services management. Would you be interested in exploring opportunities? I stared at the message for a long moment. 3 months ago, I would have deleted it immediately. I'd been loyal to the company, convinced that hard work and patience would eventually pay off. Now I understood loyalty was a one-way street. The company felt no loyalty to me when denying raises or promoting unqualified nephews. I didn't respond immediately, but I didn't delete it either. Instead, I opened my profile and quietly updated it, adding specific achievements I'd been too modest to highlight before. Managed 17 major accounts generating $8 million in annual revenue. Developed client service protocols that increased retention by 12%. Created operational tracking systems now used across 3 divisions. The facts were undeniable. And if I needed to walk away, I wanted options. But more importantly, I wanted leverage. Because I was beginning to realize something. Maybe I didn't need them at all. Maybe they needed me far more than I'd ever needed them. The breakdown happened in front of everyone. Miles was presenting to Hampton Technologies, attempting to explain our expansion timeline. He clicked through slides I'd prepared, reading bullet points without understanding the underlying analysis. Then Hampton's operations director asked a straightforward question. What's your contingency if the primary vendor experiences delays? Miles froze. Would work with the vendor to resolve issues quickly. The director frowned. But what's the backup plan? Alternative vendors, adjusted timelines? Miles looked desperately toward Franklin, who cleared his throat. Dorothy usually manages those operational details. Perhaps she can address the contingency planning. I'd been silent in the back of the room, taking notes. Now every head turned toward me. Actually, I said carefully, opening my laptop, we have 3 contingency protocols depending on delay severity. I pulled up documentation I'd created months ago, detailed backup plans Miles had never bothered to review. For minor delays under 2 weeks, we adjust internal scheduling. For moderate delays up to 6 weeks, we engage secondary vendor alpha systems. For major delays, we implement a phased rollback plan that I outlined here. I shared my screen, showing comprehensive planning Miles should have known existed. The Hampton director nodded approvingly. Franklin's face reddened. Miles looked at the floor. The room went absolutely quiet. 2 days later, Timothy Brennan requested a private meeting. His office overlooked the city, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a grey afternoon sky. Dorothy, thank you for coming. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. I wanted to discuss your role here. My stomach tightened, uncertain which direction this conversation would take. Leadership has noticed your contributions to recent client discussions, Timothy continued. Frankly, we're unclear why your expertise isn't reflected in your title or compensation. He pulled out a folder, opening it to reveal project documentation. My documentation. These operational protocols you've developed are being used across multiple divisions now. Your client retention rates significantly exceed other coordinators. You're essentially performing management functions without the recognition. I stayed silent, letting him continue. Walk me through exactly what you do daily. Not your job description. Your actual responsibilities. For the next 40 minutes, I outlined everything. The client relationships, the crisis management, the system development, the training I provided to others. Timothy took detailed notes, his frown deepening as I spoke. By the end, he sat back in his chair. This is substantially beyond coordinator level. You've been operating as a senior manager without appropriate title or pay. Finally, someone saw it clearly. Franklin's countermove came swiftly. On Friday afternoon, I received a calendar invitation for a performance review scheduled the following Tuesday. Annual evaluation and goal-setting session, the description read. But my actual annual review wasn't due for 2 months. This was rushed, reactive, designed to establish a paper trail. Franklin planned to document concerns about my attitude, my collaboration, my team fit. He'd create official records suggesting performance issues, protecting himself if leadership questioned why I'd been kept at coordinator level. It was predictable and transparent. Too late, I thought, closing the calendar notification. Timothy had already documented my actual contributions. Other executives had emails praising my work. Clients had expressed specific preferences for my involvement. Franklin's suddenly manufactured performance concerns would look exactly like what they were: retaliation for being exposed. I forwarded the meeting invitation to my personal email, adding it to my growing documentation. Then I continued working, preparing analysis for the Westfield contract that would close next month. The deal Franklin would undoubtedly take credit for despite understanding almost none of the operational complexities making it possible. The deadline slip happened predictably. Carlson Industries' quarterly deliverable was due Friday. The project required coordinating between 3 departments, managing 6 subcontractors, and ensuring compliance with 17 specific requirements. I'd always handled the coordination, tracking every moving piece, sending reminder emails, catching problems before they escalated. This quarter, Franklin had assigned the coordination to Miles, insisting his nephew needed developmental opportunities. I'd offered to brief Miles on the process. He declined, confident he could handle it. By Wednesday, it was clear the project was faltering. Subcontractors hadn't received necessary information. Departments were working from different specification versions. Nobody was tracking the compliance requirements. Thursday afternoon, Patrick Carlson called Franklin directly, his voice tight with controlled anger. I heard Franklin's side of the conversation from across the floor. I understand your concerns. Yes, we're committed to the timeline. I'll personally ensure completion. When he hung up, his expression was stormy. He called an emergency meeting, demanding status updates from everyone involved. The picture that emerged was chaos. Nobody had been tracking the big picture. Now it was urgent. And everyone turned to me, the person who'd always fixed these situations before they became crises. Timothy Brennan's call came Monday morning, before Franklin's scheduled performance review. Dorothy, can you come upstairs? Karen Westwood and I want to discuss something. The executive floor felt different than operations, quieter, more polished. Karen met me at the elevator, walking me to a small conference room where Timothy waited. They both sat across from me, expression serious but not hostile. We'll be direct, Karen began. The situation with Carlson's missed deadline has raised concerns about operational structure. Franklin claims communication breakdowns, but multiple people have indicated you were specifically excluded from coordination this quarter. I said nothing, waiting. We're also aware Franklin denied your raise request while simultaneously promoting his nephew, Timothy added. And we've noticed increasing requests from clients asking for your direct involvement. Karen leaned forward. So here's our question, Dorothy, what would it take for you to stay? The words hung in the air. They weren't defending Franklin or making excuses. They were asking what I wanted. After 2 years of being overlooked, someone was finally asking what I needed. I didn't answer immediately, because I'd learned that silence held power. I took a slow breath, organizing my thoughts precisely. This moment required clarity, not emotion. I appreciate you asking directly, I began. Here's what I need. First, a title that reflects my actual responsibilities. Senior Operations Manager, with authority to make decisions without requiring Franklin's approval for routine matters. Second, compensation aligned with that role. Market research shows senior operations managers with my experience range between 75 and 90,000 annually. I'm currently at 52. Karen and Timothy exchanged glances but said nothing, so I continued. Third, clear boundaries around my workload. I've been covering for inadequate staffing and poor planning. I'll manage my accounts and develop systems, but I won't be the catch-all for every crisis created by others' incompetence. My voice remained steady, factual. Fourth, direct reporting to you or Karen, not Franklin. The current structure has proven ineffective. I paused, then added the final requirement. And fifth, a written agreement outlining all of this, effective immediately, not subject to quarterly reviews or budget negotiations. Timothy pulled out a legal pad, taking notes. These seem reasonable. What's your timeline? I have another opportunity I'm considering, I replied truthfully. I need a decision by end of week. They weren't expecting this. The quiet coordinator had become a negotiator with alternatives. Franklin's reaction to the executive meeting was volcanic. He appeared at my cubicle 30 minutes after I returned from upstairs, his face flushed with barely controlled anger. You went over my head. Directly to executives without informing me. I looked up calmly. They requested the meeting. I attended. You're undermining my management, creating problems where none existed. His voice was rising, attracting attention from nearby coworkers. We had a performance review scheduled to address these issues properly. I stood, keeping my voice level and quiet. Franklin, leadership asked about operational structure. I answered honestly. You've turned people against me, made me look incompetent. The accusation was desperate, revealing. I've done my job, I replied simply. Nothing more, nothing less. He opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to realize we had an audience. Other coordinators pretended to work while obviously listening. Franklin's outburst was making my case better than I ever could. He turned sharply and walked away, disappearing into his office. Through the glass walls, I watched him make a phone call, gesturing emphatically. Probably to Timothy or Karen, demanding explanations, asserting his authority. But his authority had already dissolved. He'd undermined it himself through nepotism, credit stealing, and poor judgment. I just stopped covering for him. The decision came Wednesday afternoon. Karen Westwood called me personally. Dorothy, we've reviewed your requirements with leadership. We're prepared to accept your terms. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. All 5 points? Yes. Senior Operations Manager title, 82,000 annual salary, direct reporting to Timothy, defined boundaries on responsibilities, and a written agreement. Our attorney is drafting the paperwork now. She paused. This represents significant investment, Dorothy. We're making it because we recognize your value and our failure to acknowledge it sooner. The admission was surprising, more honest than I'd expected. What about Franklin's division? I asked. That's being restructured. Franklin will retain his director title, but with reduced scope. Miles is being reassigned to a junior analyst role with proper training support. We're bringing in an experienced operations director to oversee client services properly. Translation: Franklin was being quietly demoted, stripped of real authority. His poor judgment had caught up with him. When would this take effect? I asked. Immediately. You can start transitioning to your new role today. Relief and vindication washed through me, though I kept my voice professional. Thank you, Karen. I accept. They had chosen me. They had adjusted the entire structure rather than lose what I brought. The fallout was quiet but unmistakable. No announcements were made, no dramatic confrontations. But within days, everyone understood the new reality. My nameplate changed. My desk moved to an actual office with a door and window. Calendar invitations that used to go to Franklin now came to me. Franklin's scope narrowed until he was essentially managing administrative functions, paperwork, and vendor contracts. Real client relationships, strategic planning, operational decisions, all moved beyond his control. Miles was reassigned to work with the new operations director, learning proper protocols without the pressure of pretending competence he didn't possess. He seemed relieved, honestly. A forced advancement had been crushing him. Franklin wouldn't look at me. When we passed in hallways, he stared straight ahead, jaw tight. In meetings where we both attended, he contributed minimally, clearly diminished. I felt no satisfaction in his reduction. This had never been about punishing Franklin. It was about getting what I'd earned. His demotion was simply consequence, natural result of his own choices. The executives who'd formerly deferred to him now sought my input instead. Clients who'd reluctantly worked through him now had direct access to me. The organizational structure had adjusted to reality, finally reflecting who actually made things work. My new reality settled into comfortable rhythm. I controlled my calendar, setting boundaries I'd never felt empowered to establish before. Evening meetings became rare, reserved for genuine emergencies. Weekend work stopped entirely. The chronic exhaustion that had been my constant companion began to fade. I hired 2 coordinators to support the expanded operations team, training them properly with documented processes and realistic expectations. Neither was Franklin's relative. Both were promoted from within based on demonstrated competence. The work I'd been doing alone was restructured across 3 people, revealing how understaffed we'd been. My compensation reflected not just my new title but back pay for the 2 years I'd been underpaid. The difference in my bank account was tangible, meaningful. I could afford a better apartment, could save properly, could stop living paycheck to paycheck. Franklin never contacted me directly. No apologies, no acknowledgement of what he'd done. He simply existed in his diminished capacity, processing paperwork while I managed the operations he'd formerly controlled. Sometimes I wondered if he understood what had happened, if he recognized his own role in creating this situation. Probably not. People like Franklin rarely accepted responsibility. 6 months later, the recruiter's message returned to my inbox. Dorothy, the senior director of operations position I mentioned is still available. Given your recent promotion, the compensation and scope might interest you now. I read the description carefully. Larger company, broader responsibility, 30% salary increase, significant equity package. Everything I'd fought for, multiplied. I scheduled a call, then interviews. The position was remarkable, everything I'd been building toward. 2 weeks later, I accepted the offer. My resignation letter to Karen and Timothy was brief and professional. I'm grateful for the adjustments made to recognize my contributions. However, I've accepted a senior director position that represents my next career step. Karen understood immediately. Would love to counteroffer, but I suspect this is about more than compensation. She was right. It was about leaving on my terms, from a position of strength rather than desperation. Franklin never contacted me during my 2-week notice. No goodbye, no acknowledgement of our years working together. On my final day, as I packed my office, he remained invisible. He didn't need to reach out. He already understood what had happened, how dramatically he'd miscalculated. Knowing your worth isn't loud or dramatic. It's precise, documented, undeniable. And when you stop begging for recognition, the world has no choice but to adjust or watch you walk away to something better.